With the announcement of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands coming out next year, I've been thinking a lot about Borderlands recently. Specifically Borderlands 2. Mainly because, well, Borderlands 2 is my favorite video game ever made, and I know I'm not alone in that. It's weird, in the Pantheon compilation of greatest video games of all time, I don't hear Borderlands 2 get brought up super often, yet I always talk to people who love Borderlands and say it's one of their favorite games, but I don't feel like it's ever really gotten the representation on YouTube that it deserves, which is weird because almost every single big YouTuber who talks about video games or does anything has played Borderlands. They know about it. Today, I wanted to right some wrongs, and I know that I have a younger viewing audience, so for those of you who have never played this game, trust me, just because it came out in 2012 does not mean it's old and outdated and it's not something you should give a try. In fact, a lot of the games that I see people play nowadays are actually inspired by Borderlands in a lot of ways. The goal of this video ultimately is to try and get people who have never ever played Borderlands 2 in their life to go out and actually give it a try. And if you are someone who's played Borderlands 2 and already loves it, well, then I don't need to tell you how good it is, and you'll just be here to watch me gush over it. Now, I know, I'm pretty much like the #1 Borderlands 2 fan in the whole world, but I'm gonna try and be fair and not try and be biased. I'm not gonna waste any more of your time. Follow my community Discord, do all the social media, YouTuber stuff, emotionally abuse the like button, and let's jump into it. Explosions! There are a couple smaller points that I want to get out of the way very quickly before I delve into the huge, large things like the gameplay mechanics, the story and characters, the design, and the loot. I would like to mainly first talk about just small things that I think have definitely helped this game's popularity and respect over time. First of all, the Handsome Collection. The Handsome Collection is really cool. You can get Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel, which is essentially a Borderlands 2 spin-off at the end of the day. You can get both of those games with all of their DLC completely with 4K UHD texture packs, literally right now on the Epic Games launcher, and I think on the Steam store for like $18. That is insane. So that's definitely helped. Also, Borderlands 3's, let's say, interesting life has definitely helped Borderlands 2 seem even better in hindsight. As good as Borderlands 3 plays, it has so many glaring design and story issues that at the end of the day, I think people have just chosen the previous product, despite the fact that it looks way better and it feels way better. I still love Borderlands 3, but I just think Borderlands 2 was perfection, and I honestly think it was almost a fluke on Gearbox's behalf, and I don't know that we'll ever see anything top it ever again. Borderlands 2 is a team effort. Like, there is not a single, for the most part, lack of effort anywhere in this game. And I didn't really want to talk about the D word in this video, but honestly, you can't really have a discussion about Borderlands or this game without talking about one or the others, so yeah, let's talk about Destiny. Destiny 1 and 2, in my personal opinion, you can feel however you want to about them. I completely understand your opinion, and honestly, I do respect it. Destiny 1 and 2 have been the biggest disappointments in gaming history. Not because they're the worst thing ever, but because there are elements of good in both of them, and including their expansions, that could have made Destiny 1 and 2 into the current titans of the gaming industry. Bungie, I'm not putting all the blame on Activision. I'm not gonna do it. Everyone likes to use Activision as a scapegoat. It is partially their fault, but a good portion of the blame lies on Bungie. Has done a lot of things wrong with these games, and ultimately they wanted to make a mashup of Borderlands of Halo. I mean, that's literally what the lead game designer and a bunch of other people on the team said. But ultimately, you got this weird mismatch of it's kind of Frankenstein's monster of the game, but it actually comes out like a completely new product that kind of misses the best qualities of both. The failure of Destiny 1 and 2, these billion-dollar products, definitely made Borderlands 2 also seem way better in hindsight. But here's the thing, Borderlands 2 has just been good this whole time. So let's jump into some of the more serious points. Gameplay and mechanics. Obviously, this is probably the first thing that you need to get right when making a game, but especially a looter shooter. Because here's the thing, Borderlands 2 is not a very complicated game. It's a game from late 2012, and there's not really anything super intriguing about it. Oh, you fight enemies, you shoot, you can throw grenades, you have abilities, you can melee things, and when you kill enemies or open chests, you get loot. And, you know, higher quality loot, higher rarity typically means that it's better. You keep progressing, you're leveling up, you get more skills and things like that. The game is very good at making sure that you understand what pretty much everything is and how it works with your character. There's never really anything confusing in these games. You can be someone who knows literally nothing about what the best guns are, what the most optimal build for each character is, and you can still pretty much go all the way to endgame. Of course, when you get to the very hardest difficulty, you do have to look up a guide, but like a lot of the time you can make it through this game pretty fine. Some say that there is beauty in simplicity, and I would agree when it comes to Borderlands. This game is not complicated at all, but that doesn't mean it's not fun as hell. So yeah, you know, the shooting and, you know, whole killing aspect of the game is pretty fun, especially depending on what character you're playing. In the game, you never really feel like power is something that's out of your reach, and that is a very good thing. You never feel like, oh, I have to go grind to kill this enemy, oh, I have to go get this specific item to kill this boss. Like, unless you're literally doing end game max level raid bosses, there's not really tons of that, unless you're doing like a challenge run or something. It's a very simple game, but the way that you kill enemies and the way the enemies interact with you is very engaging. Obviously, you know, Goliaths are these big hulking enemies that, you know, you could piss them off and they'll start killing other friends and you can make a Goliath. There are certain types of armored psychos that actually take reduced damage to their armor and they won't take almost any damage from fire, but if you shoot them in their fleshy mask, then they will actually take fire damage. Constructors can make more robots for you to fight. It also helps that a good portion of all the bosses are pretty fun and enjoyable to fight, even the ones you just fight in the vanilla game. The core gameplay is very good. There is little fat on this game. Basically doing everything feels satisfying. You always feel like you're in control of your character, but this is largely dictated by loot. I'll get a little more into loot in the later sections of the video, but I'll quickly just get into like how it actually works rather than just talking about a lot of the guns themselves. The main way that loot works is you kill an enemy and you have a percentage chance to get whatever from them. Obviously, the higher quality the loot, the rarer it is. Borderlands is really good because you can essentially get anything from any enemy except it is incredibly rare. You could literally kill your first enemy on the very first character that you make at level 0 and you could get a legendary weapon. The chances of that happening are incredibly rare, but it is technically possible. Of course, a lot of enemies have dedicated drops, meaning that a specific enemy will drop a specific weapon. Yeah, you'll have to probably kill them over and over again, but it's actually a pretty fun process because navigating through this game is usually pretty easy. It's very cool because completing side missions or just main story missions allows you to have respawnable enemies that usually have dedicated drops, and you can farm them very easily for also XP, money, and iridium, but of course, you know, better loot. Also, there are chests scattered all throughout the games that some of them, you know, are like lower tier chests that usually give you whites or blue if you're lucky, but over the course, the higher tier chests that have a much more common chance of giving you greens, blues, and purples, and so on. Of course, there are just specific enemies that are very, very good for farming any kind of loot. And what's nice is there's so many of them throughout the game, so many great spots where you can farm chests, so many great spots where you can farm bosses, that you'll never really be running out of things to farm. And also, the drop rates in this game can be stingy with certain bosses, but they're still pretty common at the end of the day. Legendaries feel like legendaries. When you get that unique drop from an enemy, it feels special. It's not super rare to the point where you're pulling your hair out. It always feels rewarding when you finally get that drop you wanted. And of course, also with loot, I'll get into it more later, there are specific parts and elements that you can get to each drop that'll also help. Also, did I mention that this game has different elements of guns that will do more damage based on what kind of enemy you're shooting. For example, armored enemies take more corrosive damage, shielded enemies take more shock damage, so on and so forth. There's also a great mechanic in this game called Slag, where you're basically able to debuff enemies and do way more damage to them for free. The most interesting mechanic of this whole game comes from the characters themselves. All of them have unique skills that can be similar to other character skills and even skills you'll find in the same skill tree, but they all have a specific way of playing that never really feels dull. Most characters usually have like 2 or 3 main builds you can take to endgame. If you're not at endgame, you can pretty much play however you want with them. If you want to run around as Gage and just use Death Trap, you can do that for like 40 levels if you want to and have a really good time. Or don't do that. Or hell, just don't even spec into any if you want to give yourself a real challenge and just play with no abilities or anything. You can do that because the game gives you the freedom so. There are so many ways to make your character stronger, and it always feels like your character is growing, and that is something that I love about this game, is the sense of progression. Of course, the maps and missions you can do this game are all incredibly enjoyable and incredibly replayable, but that comes down, in my opinion, to... So, it was pretty much like unheard of in a lot of games like this to actually have a real story with real characters. Because, like, honestly, it's just a game where you run around in this Mad Max style planet and you just have all these sick, alien guns and everything, and, mix-match, scrap parts, grenades, and you're throwing them as shit, you're punching shit, you're an assassin and all that, you're a dwarf, man. It didn't really need to have anything complicated. But of course, Borderlands 2 went the extra mile by having, honestly, one of the most genuinely compelling stories you ever see in any, action media, in my opinion, of course. There's one big reason as to why, but I'll get to that in a second. But I quickly just want to talk about the world and atmosphere. If you ever played Borderlands 1, you would know that the game is basically made up of 2 colors, which is brown and gray. There is not really tons of variety in the game. The character and story, though, when you actually listen to a lot of the dialogue, is very gritty and interesting. Of course, there's a lot of humor in it, but when you're listening to it, you think, huh, yeah, people really are struggling on this planet. Wow, there actually is like a real power corruption. Everyone's trying to kill each other. There's really no hope for a lot of these people, aren't there? Borderlands 2, derives a little away from that gritty, depressing side of things, and it definitely tries to liven things up more, but it makes it a lot more relatable to a casual audience, which I'm fine with. Your characters that you play at don't necessarily talk as much, but of course they all have tons of personality between them with their amazing voice lines, and of course their great design overall. There are tons of characters in this game, and they all take you through sections of it, and none of them ever really feels boring. When I play through the main story of Borderlands 2 or any of the DLC, there's not really a section, except for maybe Sir Hammerlock's Hunt, where I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do this section. Of course, you have the main fan favorite characters like Claptrap and Tiny Tina and Brick and Mordecai, but there are tons and tons of great little side characters. I've heard complaints about the dialogue in the past for trying to shove innuendos and humor and all that into places that it didn't really fit.
Hey darling, right now you're ranked 4th on the TOOOO leaderboard, but don't worry. There's nothing better than getting to 3rd. Base. It's a sex thing.
And I do understand that, but a lot of those are exclusively saved for side missions that aren't important to the main story or theme at all anyways, and are purely there just for fun. And honestly, I'm not really one that's impressed by this kind of, haha, sex, funny humor. But honestly, going back through it, there are still tons of good jokes in all of these side missions, and that's one of the main reasons they're so replayable. Like I said, it also helps that all the maps and enemies are so fun to travel through and so much fun to engage with. Even if you played the game hundreds and hundreds of times and you don't even pay attention to it anymore, it's still nice to hear, and also the game has such a great atmosphere. Iridium Blight is this old, desolate mining area that's been completely abandoned and literally just seems like a giant catacomb, and it honestly just is a very overwhelming presence. Even the first area you start in is this snowy glacier area where you can tell that pretty much people do whatever they can to survive, and bandits have pretty much been ruling the land, and they're pretty much the only people who have been living out here. As you progress through the game, it noticeably gets a lot darker in areas, and you honestly feel like the sun is setting and the game is coming to a close. I like that it's very subtle. The game isn't shoving tons of imagery in your face. And even just look at the DLC areas. Even the DLCs for this game all go hard as fuck with bringing you a brand new story, a lot of them with brand new characters, and they're all entertaining. They're all basically just this big, huge side exploration, this brand new journey. Then they're not the longest things in the world. If you play these games at all, you know you can get through them very quickly. But a lot of the missions are always very entertaining to do. The replay value in this game is just insane. Also, a lot of the best loot and items comes from these DLCs, so it feels rewarding when you go out of your way to get them. Of course, we can't talk about story and characters in this game without talking about the Handsome Jack. Handsome Jack, for all that it's worth, is the greatest villain in any game ever made. Yeah, I don't think I have to defend that take. I think I could probably just say that and move on.
I will pay you to kill yourself.
I almost considered doing that. Like, what do I say about a Handsome Jack that has already not been said? Well, he's maniacal, he's cruel, he's hilarious, but he's also genuinely intimidating. You can tell that this whole thing in a way is kind of just a huge game to him, and he genuinely does not respect you or see you as a threat. But of course, as the game goes on and it becomes much more of a personal vendetta, he starts to actually take you more seriously, and you start to see how certain things in the game are actually starting to affect him as it goes on.
I'm gonna spend a long time torturing you bandit scum to death, and I'll enjoy it even more because I shouldn't say anymore. I got a little secret that you know what? You don't need to hear it. It'll probably just confuse you. Every friend, every child, every person you've ever passed on the street, I'm gonna kill them all. Angel, you can stop this. I'll still forgive you, baby.
And you start to see how certain things in the game are actually starting to affect him as it goes on. Like, yeah, you know, you'll learn more about him and how he slaughtered all these innocent civilians and all this stuff. And, you know, he kicks puppies and all that shit. But at the end of the day, he's just some guy who's just a wisecracking jackass, and he honestly kind of just looks at the world as his plaything at this point. He's always popping in to make a joke that's genuinely funny, but actually, in a way, progresses his character and progresses the plot. Like, they're not just shoving humor in to, you know, lighten the mood or anything, necessarily. When the tone needs to be dark, the tone is very dark with him. And I love that you do actually get to learn his backstory in the pre-sequel, which is basically the Handsome Jack story, so he's essentially the centerpiece of the game, and for good reason. He's entertaining, he's intimidating, and he actually is deep in some ways when you comb through his backstory, and I think he's actually a very good take on a corrupt corporate leader, because he doesn't really feel like that necessarily. He feels like an insane person who's bent with their own self-ideology, who thinks that they are the most righteous person on the planet, thinking that they are a god, and then everyone else actually needs to bow down to them so that they can make the world a better place. And that's always the thing about Jack. When you go throughout that whole story, no matter what happens or what he does or what happens to him, he always thinks that he's the one doing the right thing and that he's right.
You're a plague, bandit. You and your kind have corrupted Pandora with your greed and your hatred. It comes down to me to save this world from your kind. But I'm more than happy to do it.
He is always entertaining, and he's pretty much the perfect villain for a chaotic game like this that actually has some very interesting depth. Of course, Handsome Jack isn't the only good character. I love how they take the Borderlands 1 characters and reintroduce them into this game and give them a new lease on life. Even the DLC characters are great. Like, of course, Captain Scarlet's a great example. She gives you a great intro to this pirate landscape world and who's been through a lot of places, and she's really good at giving you some expository dialogue without actually feeling, you know, expository. Literally at the beginning of the DLC, it tells you she's gonna stab you in the back. And, well, spoiler alert, she does. It's just a good fun time. And then they introduce characters like Mr. Torg in DLC 2 and 4, and he, of course, is one of the best characters ever. Literally, he's just like the prototype for the Chad beam. He just comes around and screams meedly mow, and literally just loud, has biceps, is our bisexual queen, and is just amazing. He's the CEO of the entire Torg company. His real name is literally Mr. Torg Flexington. That is his actual name. But of course, all of this is just building towards the end game in Borderlands. I mean, honestly, for me, that is always what Borderlands has been about. Building a strong as hell character, being like the ultimate god of your world, and then taking down the strongest enemies and then trying to perfect your build on that character. There are ways to make the game harder for yourself with things like overpower levels or doing challenges, but there's also ways to make the game a lot easier for yourself. And also, the end game bosses are hard and challenging. You have to go about a specific playstyle to defeat them, but it usually always feels rewarding. Also, this game has New Game Plus. You beat the game once, you beat all the DLC, you could do it again, a harder difficulty as you level up and grow stronger, so the game essentially levels with you. I don't really have tons of complaints with the game. It is my favorite game of all time. I've soaked thousands of hours to it. I've beaten the game with every single character at the maximum level and beat every single enemy and side mission in the game. Like, I've 100%ed everything. I've done 101%. And honestly, I could do it all again right now and I'd still have a good time. And I really don't think of a single game I could say that for. The design of loot and everything in this game is just so... I mean, let's just be honest, it's just really good. I mean, you have guns that look amazing, feel amazing to use, and do unique things. You will have a gun that will shoot swords, for example. You will have a gun that actually does basically no damage, but if you shoot it at the floor and make it ricochet, then it will do insane amounts of damage. There's just so much to look at, so much to pick from, and if you're a casual player, you can pretty much use any gun, figure out what it does, and have a good time using it. The game is simple in its complexity, but it's complexly simple. That made sense, right? So yeah, I love this game. And if you've never played it, it's very cheap, and you can literally get it with all the DLC for probably less than 20 bucks on Steam or the Epic Games Launcher or on Xbox or PlayStation, whatever the hell you want to play on. Nintendo Switch even. It's on that now. You almost have no excuse to not buy and try out this game. And honestly, there is not a single looter shooter that even comes close to Borderlands 2 in any of these regards. It has everything and it does them very well, with little flaws to be found throughout the game. By no means is the game perfect. I don't think a perfect anything really exists. When it comes to the role-playing shooter, the co-op shooter, and the looter shooter genre, yeah, nothing even holds a fucking candle to Borderlands 2. So yeah, go play it. And if you've already played it, you know I'm telling other people to. Have a damn good one.